On Christmas morning, my mother ripped my embroidered stocking off the mantel, threw it straight into the fireplace, and told me I was a worthless burden. My father shoved a garbage bag of my clothes against my chest so hard I hit the wall, demanding that I pack up and get out. My sister filmed the entire scene for social media while laughing at me, completely unaware of what was resting inside the wooden box in my hands. They thought they were throwing me out onto the street, but they had no idea who actually owned the house. Welcome back to Payback Stories. I'm Amanda, and if you enjoy stories about family drama, betrayal, and karma finally catching up, make sure to hit subscribe and drop a comment. Let's get into it. The morning I was kicked out felt like the culmination of a storm that had been building for nearly 10 years. I woke up at 6:30 on Christmas morning to the smell of cinnamon coffee brewing downstairs. In our house, that smell had always been my mother's signature move for holidays, a performative gesture to pretend we were a picture-perfect family. But underneath the smell of coffee, I heard heavy footsteps moving down the hallway outside my bedroom. My father's work boots were thumping on the floorboards alongside my mother's slippers, and the sound of something heavy being dragged across the hardwood. When I sat up in bed, I saw a large black suitcase already standing in the middle of my room that I had not placed there. Before I could process what was happening, my mother knocked on the door and stepped inside without waiting for an answer. She was holding a heavy-duty trash bag in one hand and walked straight to my dresser, grabbing handfuls of my clothes and dumping them inside. I stood up and asked her flatly what she was doing, but she ignored me completely. My father, Robert, stepped into the doorway right behind her. He was 53 years old and worked as a plant foreman at the local furniture mill, and he had barely looked me in the eye for the last 2 years. Without saying a word, he grabbed the trash bag from my mother and shoved it directly into my chest, sending me stumbling back into the wall so hard a framed photo fell off the nail and cracked on the carpet. "Pack your stuff and get out of our house," my father growled, looking at the wall right above my head. My mother did not try to stop him. Instead, she grabbed my arm and pulled me down the hallway toward the stairs. Downstairs, the 8-foot Christmas tree was lit up in front of the picture window, displaying the fat-colored lights my grandfather had used since the 70s. My mother walked straight to the fireplace mantel, pulled down my white wool stocking that my grandmother had hand-embroidered with my name, and tossed it into the open flames. I watched the synthetic lining catch fire instantly, filling the room with a sharp, chemical smell. My mother turned around, looked me in the eyes, and said, "You've ruined every single Christmas since the day you were born. We never wanted you here." I stood there in my socks, staring at the embers of my name burning in the hearth, and realized I was not even surprised. She had been dropping subtle hints about how much of a drain I was for 25 years, and now she finally had an audience. Hanging next to the empty spot on the mantel were 4 remaining stockings for my mother, my father, my sister Nicole, and my sister's new boyfriend, Brandon, who had moved in 2 weeks prior. A guy I had barely spoken 10 sentences to had his name on the chimney, while mine was literally turning to ash. My 22-year-old sister, Nicole, came sliding down the stairs right behind us with her phone extended on a selfie stick. She had tens of thousands of followers on social media and was already recording the entire scene live for her online audience. She pointed the lens toward her own face first, doing her standard cheery greeting before swinging the camera around to catch me standing barefoot by the front door. "Good luck starting over, loser," Nicole said, laughing softly into the microphone. "Nobody in this house is going to miss having a burden around." My father unlocked the front door and pushed it open, letting the freezing Michigan winter air rush into the living room. I did not scream, cry, or give them the dramatic reaction they were hoping to post online. I simply reached down to the bottom step, picked up a small carved walnut box that I had brought downstairs the night before, and walked out into the snow. The ice stung the soles of my wool socks before I even reached the driveway where my old sedan was parked. I opened the car door, got inside, and shut it as gently as possible, using the exact technique my grandfather had taught me when I was a kid. My family thought my quietness meant I was completely defeated, but they failed to realize that silence was the very first tool my grandfather had ever given me. To understand how I ended up in that car with a carved wooden box, you have to understand my grandfather, Walter Holloway. Walter was a quiet, practical man born in 1946 who ran a small custom cabinet shop on 8th Street in Traverse City for over 40 years. His shop always smelled like cedar shavings, wood varnish, and dark percolator coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long. He wore a heavy leather apron with a distinct horseshoe-shaped burn mark on the right side from a piece of stray walnut that had kicked back off his lathe decades ago. Whenever people asked why he never bought a new apron, he would just chuckle and say the burn mark proved the leather was doing its job. When I was 8 years old, my mother started dropping me off at Walter's shop almost every afternoon while my younger sister was enrolled in private tutoring and dance academies. My grandfather would step out to the driveway, take my heavy school backpack off my shoulders, and tell me we had important work to do in the shop. He handed me scraps of pine wood along with a block of high-grit sandpaper, teaching me how to smooth out the rough edges carefully. "Always sand with the grain, sweetie," he used to tell me while adjusting his safety glasses. "If you go against the grain, you'll leave scratches that are almost impossible to fix later, and people work the exact same way." In the summer of 2015, my grandmother Evelyn passed away suddenly after suffering a stroke at the kitchen sink. My mother immediately insisted that our family move into my grandfather's 4-bedroom house on Cherry Bend Road to help care for him, and my father agreed without putting up any fight. They sold our family's modest ranch home in town for a decent sum, packed up our things, and moved right in. My grandfather cleared out his home office so my sister and I could share a room, moving his drafting desk and tools out into the garage. I was 15 years old at the time, and on our very first night in his home, I overheard my mother talking to my father in the hallway outside my bedroom door. "Just hang in there," my mother whispered to my father while they were unpacking boxes in the hall. "He's over 70 now, so it's only going to be 5 years at the most." Even at 15, I knew that calculating how long your aging parent had left to live while standing in his hallway was fundamentally cruel. When I got up an hour later to drink a glass of water, I saw my grandfather standing quietly near the linen closet in his flannel pajamas, holding an empty mug. He had clearly heard every single word my mother said, but he did not confront her or make a scene. Instead, he just stepped aside to let me pass, and the very next morning, he asked if I wanted to start coming to his shop with him every single Sunday. For the next 8 years, I spent almost every Sunday sitting beside him at his workbench learning how to handle raw timber and hand tools. Meanwhile, the dynamic at home became increasingly hostile as my mother found new ways to make me feel like an outsider. During a Memorial Day family barbecue in 2016, my mother misplaced a cheap silver bracelet she had purchased at a local boutique and loudly accused me of stealing it in front of 15 gathered guests. When I told her firmly that I had not touched her jewelry, she marched across the patio and slapped me across the face hard enough to leave a red handprint on my cheek. My sister giggled into her drink while my father stared down at his shoes, pretending not to see anything. My grandfather immediately walked over from the grill, placed his large, steady palm on my shoulder, and guided me inside the house away from the crowd. He wrapped a handful of ice cubes in a clean dish towel, held it gently against my bruised cheek, and leaned in close. "Don't let her see you cry, Amanda," he told me in a quiet, firm tone. "You save your tears, and you save every piece of strength you've got." The very next afternoon, he called me into his shop, walked over to his primary workbench, and picked up a beautifully finished wooden box. It was crafted from solid dark walnut with delicate dovetail joints, a cherry wood inlay around the rim, and my name burned neatly into the top lid alongside the date. He placed the smooth box flat into my hands like he was handing me a fragile antique and looked me dead in the eye. "I don't want you to open this right now," my grandfather instructed me softly. "Just keep it somewhere safe, and whenever things get unbearable, remember that you have a way out." I took that walnut box home, tucked it beneath the winter sweaters at the bottom of my closet, and kept it hidden for over 9 years without ever lifting the lid. I trusted my grandfather completely, even if I did not understand why he insisted on keeping the contents a secret from the rest of the family. There was another tradition my grandfather maintained every single year without fail until he passed away. On every Christmas Eve, he would find a convoluted reason to take me out to his cabinet shop for 4 or 5 hours under the guise of sweeping up sawdust or organizing lumber. I realized later that he was deliberately keeping me away from the house so my mother would have less contact with me during the holidays. Every Christmas Day, my mother found a way to declare that I had somehow ruined the family celebration. One year it was because I accidentally dropped a glass ornament, another year because I left a kettle boiling too long, and another because I did not smile wide enough in the annual family Christmas card photo. My mother delivered these criticisms with the cold neutrality of a weather anchor reciting the daily forecast, making sure everyone present knew I was the family's primary disappointment. My grandfather spent 13 years quietly shielding me from those comments by pulling me into his shop, giving me a sanctuary away from her constant jabs. In September of 2024, his health declined rapidly after doctors diagnosed him with aggressive pancreatic cancer, and he passed away just 6 weeks later at 78 years old. At the reception following his funeral, my mother put on a massive display of grief, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief while receiving condolences near the buffet table. While my mother was accepting sympathy from neighbors like she had personally suffered a devastating loss, I noticed her repeatedly glancing at the wooden bookshelf where my grandfather kept his financial files and bourbon. She was looking at his private records with the calculated focus of someone who believed they were about to inherit a massive estate. In toxic families, there is a specific kind of financial arithmetic that takes place behind closed doors. On the surface, it looks like equal support, but underneath, one child is viewed as a worthy investment while the other is treated as a permanent liability. My sister Nicole was sent to a prestigious private academy from middle school through high school at a cost of over $20,000 a year in tuition. She never held a summer job because my mother insisted that Nicole possessed a special creative spark that needed to be nurtured without the distraction of manual labor. When I turned 17 and asked if there was any money put aside for my college tuition, my mother folded her hands and gave me a practiced, sympathetic smile. "Honey, you're just not the academic type," she told me smoothly. "College isn't really your path, but if you want to try community college, you'll need to pay for it yourself." I did not complain. Instead, I took a job waiting tables at a local tavern, paid my own way through a 2-year degree program in horticulture, and took out $11,000 in modest student loans. I learned very quickly to stop asking my parents for financial assistance or expecting them to treat me as an equal. That same summer, my sister borrowed my car without asking so she could drive to the beach with her friends, scraping the entire passenger side against a concrete pillar in the parking lot. The repair estimate came out to $1,800, but when I showed the paper to my mother, she simply laid it on the kitchen table and looked at me expectantly. "Your sister is building her social media brand right now, Amanda, so we all need to make sacrifices to support her," my mother declared without batting an eye. "You're the responsible one who has a steady income, so you need to handle this repair bill for the family." I ended up paying the $1,800 out of my own savings account just to keep the peace in the house. 2 weeks later, Nicole proudly brought home a brand new high-end tablet that she bought using income from a minor sponsorship deal she had hidden from everyone. She unboxed it right in front of me while sipping her morning latte, without offering a single word of thanks for the car repairs I had just funded on her behalf. By late November of 2025, my mother updated her public social media banner with a graphic announcing that huge, blessed changes were coming for our family. She ran a popular local lifestyle blog with thousands of readers and held weekly women's group meetings in our formal dining room, where everyone viewed her as a devoted, pious matriarch. Around that same time, Nicole's fitness influencer boyfriend, Brandon, moved into our home full-time. He immediately claimed my grandfather's old ground floor reading room, the quiet space where my grandfather used to teach me card games, and painted the wood paneling a flat industrial gray to use as a workout filming studio. Few days after moving his gear in, Brandon walked into the kitchen, glanced at my work clothes, and told me flatly that my general presence did not align with the modern image they were trying to cultivate in the house. I did not bother arguing with him. I simply turned around, walked upstairs to my room, and kept my door shut. On Christmas Eve, I came downstairs late at night to get a glass of water and heard my parents speaking in low tones in the dark kitchen. "After tomorrow morning, it's finally just going to be our real family living here," my mother said softly to my father. My father did not object. He just rinsed his coffee mug in the sink and walked right past me on the stairs without acknowledging my presence. I went back to my bedroom, pulled the carved walnut box out from under my sweaters, and set it on the nightstand beside my bed. I looked at my grandfather's handwriting etched into the dark wood, slept for maybe 4 hours, and woke up at 6:30 to the sound of my family packing up my life. After being shoved out the door on Christmas morning, I drove my car to a nearby grocery store parking lot, pulled into a quiet spot near the back, and turned off the engine. It was 9 in the morning, and the parking lot was completely deserted in the falling snow. I picked up the walnut box from the passenger seat, set it on my lap, and pressed my thumbs against the fitted lid until the seal finally gave way. A faint scent of dried cedar and old paper immediately filled the cold car cabin, preserved from 9 years earlier. Resting inside were 4 distinct items that my grandfather had laid out with extreme care. The first was a heavy brass house key attached to a worn leather tag that had the word, Front, 1971, written on it in black ink, the exact key my grandfather had carried on his brass belt clip for as long as I could remember. The second item was a small slip of yellow-lined paper with a short message written in faint pencil, anytime, any reason, any hour. The third item was a crisp white business card for Northern Trust Bank in downtown Traverse City, listing a man named Gary Pettin as the senior branch manager. On the back of the card, my grandfather had written a 6-digit account reference number along with the instruction, "Tell Gary you are my granddaughter. He knows what to do." The final item was a black and white photograph of my grandfather standing in an orchard, cradling a newborn baby wrapped in a blanket, with the date May 18, 2000, my birthday, written on the back. Sitting in that empty parking lot with the cold air seeping through the car windows, I looked at that photograph and finally let tears fall down my face. I cried quietly for about 5 minutes while the heater blew warm air over my cold feet, then wiped my face, put the contents back into the box, and started the engine. I checked my phone and saw that my mother had already blocked my number, while my father was not answering his calls. I sent a quick text to my old coworker Lauren to let her know I was okay, then waited out the holiday at a cheap motel down the road, knowing I had to wait until the bank opened the following morning. At 8:45 on the morning of December 26th, I pulled up outside the historic brick building that housed Northern Trust Bank on Front Street. I walked through the heavy glass doors into the quiet marble lobby, carrying my grandfather's wooden box inside a plain canvas bag. The teller behind the counter looked up at my simple winter coat and slightly bruised collarbone, but maintained a completely professional composure. I laid the business card on the marble counter and told her quietly that my grandfather had instructed me to present the card regarding an account. The teller read the note on the back, looked at me with a nod of recognition, and picked up her desk phone to place a brief internal call. Within less than a minute, a tall, gray-haired man in his early 60s stepped out of a private corner office wearing a well-worn brown wool cardigan. He stopped a few feet away from me, looked at my face, and addressed me directly as Miss Hayes. He did not ask what I needed. Instead, he simply gestured toward his office door and asked me to bring the box inside with me. His office was lined with dark wood shelves, featuring a large oak executive desk that I recognized instantly as one of my grandfather's custom creations. On the wall hung a framed photograph of my grandfather and Gary standing together on a fishing boat from 20 years ago. Gary closed the office door, pulled down the window blinds, and sat down behind the desk with his hands folded neatly. "Miss Hayes, your grandfather Walter prepared for this specific conversation over 9 years ago," Gary told me calmly. "He told me that, when you eventually walked through that front door carrying his walnut box, I was to give you the complete picture immediately." Gary opened his bottom desk drawer, pulled out a thick navy blue legal binder labeled with my name, and laid it directly between us. "Your grandfather didn't just leave you a modest sum of money," Gary said, pushing the file closer to me. "He created a bulletproof legal framework that ensures your family can never take what belongs to you." He pointed to the top document inside the binder, which was a notarized copy of the Holloway Family Living Trust, executed back in August of 2016. The trust designated my grandfather as the initial trustee, Gary as the successor trustee, and listed me as the sole primary beneficiary. Gary carefully walked me through the legal structure of the estate using simple, clear language. In August of 2016, just 2 months after my mother had slapped me at the family barbecue, my grandfather had walked into a local estate attorney's office. He asked the attorney if it was legally possible to transfer ownership of his house to his granddaughter without alerting his daughter or son-in-law. The attorney drafted a quitclaim deed, transferring the real estate title directly into the irrevocable family trust, while retaining a life estate that allowed my grandfather to reside in the home until his death. The moment my grandfather passed away in October of 2024, the property title transferred automatically to me as the sole trust beneficiary by operation of law, completely bypassing the public probate court system. Your parents and sister have been living in your house for the last 14 months without a lease and without paying a single dollar of rent, Gary explained plainly. He then turned to the next section of the file, which detailed a primary bank account set up under a transfer on death designation in my name. The current balance of that account stood at $86,000, funded entirely by cash deposits my grandfather had quietly saved from custom cabinetry commissions over the final decade of his life. Gary also showed me a log detailing 3 separate occasions over the past year where my mother had visited the bank branch demanding access to my grandfather's funds. On each occasion, Gary had personally informed her that she was not a designated beneficiary on any accounts, sending her away empty-handed every time. Furthermore, my grandfather had purchased a comprehensive title insurance policy in 2016 to guarantee that if anyone ever tried to challenge my sole ownership of the property, the legal defense costs would be fully covered by the insurer. The total assessed value of the property, the bank funds, the professional shop tools, and his classic pickup truck came out to over $460,000. Gary looked at me across the desk and tapped his finger on the final page of the asset summary. Your mother told my staff on multiple occasions that you were a financial drain on the family, Gary said with a slight smile. I am sitting here looking at nearly $500,000 worth of legal evidence proving the exact opposite. He then handed me a small brass key from his desk drawer and guided me down the hallway to the bank's secure vault room to access safe deposit box 218. Inside the long metal deposit drawer was a sealed white envelope with my name written across the front in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting, along with a key tied to an old recipe card. I sat alone in the small private viewing room, broke the wax seal on the envelope, and unfolded a 2-page handwritten letter. The message was dated from 2016, written shortly after the day he gave me the carved walnut box. My dear Amanda, the letter read. If you are reading this, it means your mother has finally pushed things too far, just as I knew she eventually would. I am sorry I am not standing there beside you today, but I had to put these protections in place early. I saw how they treated you, the incident at the barbecue, the way they favored your sister, and the cold calculations she made in my hallway. I never forced you to take sides because I wanted you to grow up without that burden, so I made the decision for you in advance. The house is yours, the funds are yours, and no one can take them from you. You were never a burden to me. You were the only one who truly cared about the craft and closed doors quietly. Come back home when you're ready. Love, Grandpa. I sat in that quiet vault room holding the paper against my chest for several minutes before packing everything securely into my bag and stepping back out into the lobby. When I turned my cell phone back on in the car, I saw over 20 missed calls and urgent voicemail messages from my mother and father. In her earlier messages, my mother's voice was frantic, claiming there had been a terrible misunderstanding on Christmas morning and begging me to come back to the house so we could handle things as a family. In her later voicemails, her tone turned sharp and defensive, accusing me of withholding family money and claiming my grandfather was not in his right mind when he managed his affairs. I ignored every single message, drove straight to a modest hotel on the edge of town, and called the phone number for estate attorney Catherine Crestwood, which Gary had provided. Catherine was a seasoned attorney in her late 60s who had handled my grandfather's original trust paperwork back in 2016. She brought me into her office the following morning, poured me a cup of coffee, and laid out the exact administrative process for removing my family from the property. Your grandfather designed this entire setup so that you wouldn't have to engage in a messy emotional battle, Catherine told me clearly. We don't need to argue with them. We simply serve the proper legal notices and let the local legal process handle the rest. Catherine drafted a formal 30-day notice to quit under Michigan law, identifying my parents, my sister, and her boyfriend as legal tenants at will who were residing in the home without a lease or ownership interest. On December 28th, a professional process server named Sandra arrived at the Cherry Bend Roadhouse to formally hand-deliver the eviction documents. My mother answered the door in the middle of hosting her weekly women's group, wearing a salon cape while styling a neighbor's hair in the kitchen. When Sandra presented the legal notice and announced that the 30-day clock to vacate the premises had officially begun, my mother flew into a rage and tore the paper in half right in front of her guests. Sandra remained completely calm, pointed out the small body-worn camera recording the entire interaction from her lapel, and informed my mother that service was legally complete regardless of whether she destroyed the paper. Within 48 hours, my mother attempted to hire a local civil attorney to contest the notice. But after reviewing the irrevocable trust and the title insurance policy, the lawyer flatly informed my mother that she had zero legal standing to fight the action and billed her $400 for the consultation. When the 30-day notice expired on January 29th without my family packing up or leaving, Catherine promptly filed a summary proceedings complaint at the local district court. A formal court hearing was scheduled for early February before Judge Margaret Greaves. My parents showed up to the courtroom without legal counsel, attempting to argue to the judge that the house had been meant for the entire family and that my grandfather had been manipulated into changing his estate plan. Judge Greaves reviewed the original notarized trust deeds, looked over her glasses at my parents, and stated firmly that the legal ownership belonged entirely to me before issuing an immediate judgment for possession. The court granted my family a mandatory final deadline to clear out their personal belongings, warning that failure to vacate by the appointed date would result in an immediate sheriff-led lockout. On the morning of the scheduled lockout, my sister Nicole decided to host a live broadcast on her social media channels in a desperate attempt to gain public sympathy and portray me as a heartless relative kicking her family onto the street. She set up her tripod and ring light in the formal living room, positioning my mother on the sofa dressed in a white sweater to look as innocent as possible. When the stream went live at 10:30 in the morning, thousands of online viewers tuned in as my mother began crying on camera, claiming her ungrateful daughter was turning her own parents out into the freezing winter air. However, her performance quickly fell apart when she tried to explain the history of the conflict and blurted out on camera that she had destroyed my childhood Christmas stocking in the fireplace out of frustration. The live comment section immediately flipped, with viewers asking why a mother would burn her own daughter's belongings and demanding to know who actually held the legal title to the property. While the viewer count rapidly climbed past 50,000 people, a loud knock echoed from the front porch. Deputy Sheriff Dennis Hawthorne stepped inside the entryway holding an official writ of restitution, accompanied by a locksmith carrying a tool bag. The camera caught the deputy clearly announcing that he was executing a court-ordered lockout on behalf of the legal property owner, Amanda Hayes, and giving everyone 30 minutes to gather essential items before the locks were changed. The entire online audience watched in real time as my sister's face went completely pale, realizing that her public narrative had completely collapsed in front of tens of thousands of live viewers. My father walked out of the kitchen, stepped past my sobbing mother and the deputy, and sat down on the front porch steps with his head in his hands. "She owns the house," my father said quietly to the ground, his voice picked up cleanly by the live microphone. "She's owned it the entire time, and we never should have done what we did." That short video clip of my father confessing the truth on the porch was recorded by viewers and re-uploaded across multiple online platforms, accumulating millions of views within 48 hours and completely ruining my sister's online brand reputation. Within a week of the lockout, several lifestyle companies canceled their endorsement deals with my sister, citing the negative publicity surrounding her live broadcast. Her boyfriend Brandon packed his equipment and moved out 3 days later, sending her a short text stating that his fitness brand could no longer be associated with her family drama. My parents were forced to use a chunk of their modest savings account to lease a small 2-bedroom apartment above a commercial office 20 miles away in a neighboring town. My mother permanently shut down her lifestyle blog after every single post was flooded with comments from strangers asking why she had treated her eldest daughter so horribly. My father sent me one long text message a few weeks later, acknowledging that he had spent 25 years failing to stand up for me and stating that he did not expect forgiveness, but wanted to apologize for his spinelessness. I chose not to reply to his message, but I kept the text saved on my phone as a reminder that the truth had finally come to light. On a cold, clear Saturday morning near the end of March, I drove up the driveway of the Cherry Bend Roadhouse carrying my grandfather's original brass key. Deputy Hawthorne was waiting on the porch to hand me the official property release forms, offering a warm handshake before driving away. I walked inside the quiet living room, where the hardwood floors laid by my grandfather over 50 years ago were still gleaming in the morning light. The house was completely silent, smelling faintly of old cedar and fresh paint. A few days later, I pulled down the attic access ladder and climbed up to inspect the storage space under the roof eaves. Tucked into the far corner was a heavy cardboard box labeled with my name and my grandfather's bold marker script from 2020. I opened the flaps and found a beautifully hand-stitched cream wool stocking embroidered with my name in dark red thread, crafted by my grandfather during his final years when his hands had started to shake. Beneath the stocking rested 4 additional carved walnut boxes, identical to the one he had given me years ago, a set of backup records he had prepared just in case I ever lost the first ones. I sat on the wooden attic floorboards in the quiet morning light, holding that hand-stitched stocking against my chest, and finally felt a sense of complete peace. My grandfather had spent years silently building a fortress of legal protection around me while my mother was trying to tear my self-worth down. I brought the stocking downstairs, hung it neatly on the wooden mantel above the clean fireplace, and set his carved walnut box right beside it. I moved his heavy oak workbench back to the center of the shop, laid out his hand chisels in order of size, and tied his leather apron around my waist. I might not be a master woodworker like my grandfather was, but I will spend the rest of my life honoring the lessons he taught me, moving forward carefully, staying grounded, and always working with the grain. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Payback Stories for a new family drama story every day, and I'll see you in the next one.